Liar. Everywhere. On netrootsradio.com. David Waldman. Kagro. In the morning. Now, here's David Waldman.
Hey, good morning, everybody. How you doing? It's Friday. We made it. Friday, August 9th, 2024. Time for another show. Time for another trip to the DMV for me today. Exciting days ahead as I take care of all sorts of errands, and we got 1 week left until college boy number 2 returns to campus, which will impact the show, well, not very much, but I'll be thinking about him and fretting over his progress, and so you'll hear that in the show. You'll feel it in the background. But we're ready for another Friday show. Not sure what this one will bring. Of course, lots of, on the one hand, we have the pull of the buried stories waiting in the wing, thematic stories, things I've been saying for about a week or two that ought to wait for Friday and then do, but then who knows what's going to happen in between then and Friday or Thursday night. Big chance to disrupt the news cycle for Donald Trump. And he did it. He held a wacko press conference at his house, which is a weird thing. And people don't really often note that. Although the newspapers always say that Pervalago is his private club and residence, and it's kind of weird to have the press conference there. It's also kind of weird for him to have a press conference accusing the other side of being low energy and not having enough press conferences when he's like, well, will you guys wait in my living room and I'll shuffle from the bedroom to the living room and talk to you for an hour about nothing, and you'll call it a press conference. And I'll say it's a major press conference and whatever. I mean, you don't print major, but anyway, I don't know exactly what he spent most of his time doing yesterday, but the storylines that made it out of there are many, and there's more stories, it seems, about the way the press decided to cover the non-event than about what he actually said, which was crazy. And, of course, the usual controversy over whether or not the mainstream press were tidying up what he said such that it would look like he was not, altogether losing it. The man's not all there, and it's pretty obvious. And I guess the most egregious example, the one that did break through, even with the press covering it, is apparently Trump used the occasion, I guess, to partially at least seed the Pervalago, why not? Mr. Magoo, Pervalago, ballroom with friendly press, i.e. weird press. Things that are produced in the basement of townhomes owned by strange dissident Egyptian parliamentarians. I mean, that's a real thing. It's happening. And mom's basements around the country, of course, and in some other countries as well. And at any rate, I guess it must have been one of them. I don't know if anybody even identified who asked the question. Not even sure what the question was. But essentially, it got him onto the topic of, this was somebody who wanted to plant a storyline, I guess, and get some commentary on it. It might have been a request of the Trump campaign, for all I know. One of the things that is true, I guess, about Kamala Harris and her past is that at some point she was in a relationship of some sort with Willie Brown, big California politico, like majority leader of the state assembly. I don't remember whether he was a Senate leader or assembly leader. I'm not certain which, but, the top Democrat in the state legislature. He was mayor of San Francisco. He's just an all-around California muckety-muck. And they dated, something like that, at any rate. So I guess the Republicans or the Trump sympathetic weirdo press thinks that there might be something there. Let's explore it, and asks him, can you comment on that, essentially? And he uses an excuse to kind of go off on a bit of a tangent, as usual. This one being Willie Brown. I know Willie Brown pretty good. He and I go way back. I haven't seen him in years, but we have a relationship. We're pretty close, actually. As a matter of fact, and he goes on to tell the story of him or the story of, when I say the story of, this story does not exist, but he makes up a story in which he and Willie Brown are taking a helicopter ride somewhere, and he can't remember where, it doesn't matter. He says, we're headed to some location or another, because he has no idea where it might have been. And of course it didn't happen. There's two other things. He just wasn't prepared to name some place fake. We were flying to Mars, maybe, who knows. And at any rate, they have an emergency that necessitates an emergency landing. As he says, I went down in a helicopter with them. We thought this was it. But we went down, but we were okay. Anyway, it was pretty memorable. So I know Willie Brown pretty well. I guess he wanted people to think he had shared a near-death experience with Willie Brown. And so they had this forever bond. They could read one another's minds. Their wands worked interchangeably. He had a lightning-shaped scar on his forehead. You know the story. Anyway, as it turns out, of course, Willie Brown, 1, didn't die in a helicopter crash. 2, didn't die in anything. Still alive. Do you remember nearly dying in a helicopter with Donald Trump? No, of course not. I've never been in a helicopter with Donald Trump for any reason. Not crashing, flying, admiring the inside of a helicopter before it took off, but being sure never to get in it while it took off. Nothing. No helicopters, me and Donald Trump. Someone figures out, not at the time, nobody clarifies it in the room, but I guess the New York Times decided to take a look because they were like, what is this all about? Maybe it was the Times. I don't know who uncovered it, but basically somebody searches the archives and says, you took a helicopter ride. I don't think they've confronted him with this. That Donald Trump took a helicopter ride. I think maybe they said to survey wildfire damage in California, which, that could happen any day, any time. I don't know why Donald Trump would go. Maybe he had some property there. I'm sure he's had property that was damaged. I mean, honestly, if he owns property in California, someone should light it on fire. Go ahead. But, be careful. It's dry out there. You're going to damage other people's property. Don't be an arsonist. I'm just kidding. It's one of those Rush Limbaugh type jokes. Anyway, they're surveying fire damage, and the paper figures out you were on a helicopter with Jerry Brown. Different Brown, California muckety muck, governor of California, presidential candidate from time to time. But that happened, and maybe you just confused the two Browns. They don't look alike. Willie Brown is black. Jerry Brown, not black. He's white. Maybe in Trump's mind, I took a white Brown and a black Brown and I mix them together and it's a Brown. Plus his name is Brown. That was so easy to answer. Anyway, I mean, maybe. But as it turns out, it was Jerry Brown, who also says there was nothing wrong with the helicopter. And also on board was Gavin Newsom, who I guess was about to take over as governor at the time. And he, too, very much alive and can tell you there were no problems with the helicopter. An otherwise unmemorable flight, except for the fact that there was a weirdo orange guy on board. So I don't really know what to make of that, except that it's just one of those weird things where, he's made up a story and no one's, who could fact check that on the spot? I mean, you have Google in your pocket. You could be doing it, but you're supposed to be paying attention to the utterances, as stupid as they may be, at the press conference. So, there's that, which is weird. Although it's interesting that I guess maybe some Trump sympathetic press decided that this was a story and they couldn't get to Willie Brown, but they ended up on Jerry Brown, but also Gavin Newsom. And then, does that mean we can ask questions about Gavin Newsom? Because he used to be in a relationship with Kimberly Guilfoyle, who's now in a relationship with Donald Trump Jr., which is also kind of weird and strange and might lead to a line of questioning. How come Kimberly Guilfoyle has been having what appears to be plastic surgery to alter her face to look more like Melania Trump, who she's older than, by the way, but who, is, of course, married to Dad, Donald Trump himself. Donald Trump Jr., his son, is dating a woman modeled to look like Melania, but a couple years older than Melania. And thankfully, this has not led us to any stories about them being weird. because they're trying to get out from underneath the weird storyline. Anyway, I just thought I would put them right back in there where they belong. And that's a good thing to do on Friday. Other note on Friday, while the production staff is around, I'll let them know the sad news that Chichi Rodriguez has died. Yes, Hall of Fame golfer, Puerto Rican golfer, and as our friend SFDB notes here in this Mastodon note, one of the game's flashier players back in the day, 88 years old. And I'm sure will be sorely missed. But yeah, I recall his days on the tour as well. Although honestly, in this photo here, which I guess by the look of the caddy's garb may have been, it may have been at the Masters. Although it's also the case that back in the day, they very often had the caddies wear the white jumpsuits on other tour stops too, I think. And if I can get a close-up of the hat, I can't tell whether it's an Augusta National hat or not. Although there is somebody in a green blazer in the background, too. But again, this is the 70s, and anything could be happening. So I don't know. But the caddy is no slouch himself in terms of the mode of dress. Okay, so that news having been announced, we can move on to other subjects. I mentioned I have a vague plan about the long read version of things today. However, I do want to catch up on a couple of other stories, courtroom happenings, etc. And by the way, maybe I can comb through. I have a ABC News, ABC 10. Is this, where? Where's ABC 10? Is it a New York, or rather a California station covering it as local news, this strange helicopter story, or no? I can't tell. Actually, they're not giving anything up, even with the weather alert. They're not telling her. Oklahoma headlines, Texas headlines. Okay, so that gives me some idea of the region of the country. But anyway, it doesn't even matter because they're carrying CNN's coverage of it. Trump said he, quote, went down, not that kind, in helicopter, quote, emergency landing, with former San Francisco mayor, no quotes there, the actual San Francisco mayor, who says it never happened. Well, okay. Rashard Rose reporting it that way. And, is there anything else? The quote, I know Willie Brown very well. In fact, I went down in a helicopter with him. Again, phrasing. We thought maybe this is the end. We were in a helicopter going to a certain location together, as will happen when you're in a helicopter. And there was an emergency landing. Trump told reporters gathered at his Pervalago resort for his first news conference since the Democratic ticket was announced. Of course, the purpose of the news conference to talk about how many awesome press conferences he's had and how few she's had. And isn't he really great? By the way, there were some other wacko stories told there. This one, I think, focuses on the helicopter only, but did they get to any of the other things? Apparently, part of the claim, I think I have another article about it, is I guess he was asked about the comparison between the crowds he's drawing and the ones that Kamala Harris is drawing, now that they're shadowing one another. Or at least that J.D. Vance is doing the shadowing. But they've both had a couple of rallies, and, the crowd size is a little underwhelming for the guy who's been running for the presidency since 2015. People are getting, frankly, quite bored with it. Then there's the new girl who's running for president, and that's exciting always. You would expect for her to be drawing larger crowds. Also, he's crazy, she's not, so, people are all in for the let me have a not crazy person. But anyway, asked to comment on the crowds, he, of course, went immediately, to Trump world. Not only are all his crowds consistently bigger every time, every place, but he also had the biggest crowd ever. And everyone knows that on January 6th, fomented an insurrection attacking the Capitol and seeking to overthrow the government, but also had a big speech on the ellipse beforehand, at which point I told people that they should march to the Capitol and launch an insurrection. He actually literally set an insurrection on foot toward the Capitol. It's a federal crime. I don't know why they're not charging with it, but we can ask Jack Smith later on when we talk about his story of the day. But anyway, he claims that at the Ellipse, he had he doesn't say huge anything anymore. I think he dropped that. But he had a huge crowd, and everyone knows, just from looking at it, it was in the same place geographically. It wasn't. So that you could compare photos of the two. You can, but you'll see that there's no comparison. But he claims as big, probably bigger crowd than Martin Luther King's famous I Have a Dream speech, which I think was probably the largest crowd ever assembled in Washington, D.C. for any reason. Maybe, maybe not, but it's certainly fabled as among the largest crowds, and the photography from the time shows an enormous gathering. Nowhere near that size was the gathering on the Ellipse. It wasn't the same real estate. It was the National Mall, sort of, kind of, but nah, not really. Anyway, and of course, there's nothing close to the crowds for King's speech, the March on Washington, what have you. And it's just incredibly dumb and crazy to say so. And they kind of sort of hint that, like the New York Times coverage is like, and he claimed that he had a crowd as large, and they don't even bother with falsely claimed or saying anything about it. I think they're just depending on common knowledge. We don't have to point this out. Everybody knows it's untrue. It's so untrue, we don't have to say anything, but you really still have to say something. You should say he's really deluded. He may be mentally incapable of handling the candidacy, much less the presidency, but they don't bother. But they go on to move on to other things. And this one focuses on the helicopter only. Some speculation about what the hell he was trying to do. So Brown says, well, anyway, this was Trump going on saying this was not a pleasant landing, and Willie was a little concerned. So I know him. I know him pretty well. I mean, I haven't seen him in years. Brown, however, rejected Trump's account as, quote, obviously wrong, unquote, during a phone call later Thursday with CNN, saying, I've never been in a helicopter with him in my life. He is trying his best to get some way to degrade Kamala, the former mayor also said of Trump, and his Democratic rival for the presidency. There is no reason why her name ought to have been mentioned anywhere near, or ought to be mentioned anywhere near his lies, period. Both he and Gavin Newsom and everybody associated with the story apparently is like, well, even for those of us who were in a helicopter, we were flying looking at fire damage in whatever year. There was no mention of Kamala Harris on this flight. She wasn't, she wasn't the national political figure, I don't think, at the time. And even if she was in the Senate or was the, California Attorney General, it wasn't the topic of discussion. We wouldn't have been bantering about it. So what do you think of this Kamala Harris? It wouldn't have come up. The New York Times reported on Thursday that the former president apparently confused Willie Brown with former California Governor Jerry Brown, with whom he toured wildfire damage by helicopter in November 2018. Oh, okay. Well, that's actually quite a lot later than I thought. Kamala Harris, of course, was a national figure, but again, senator from California. Could have come up, I guess, but just wasn't going to be the topic of conversation when he's there with the then governor and incoming new governor. Anyway, a spokesperson for Jerry Brown told the Time there was no emergency landing and no discussion of Kamala Harris. Gavin Newsom, who also toured the wildfires in 2018 as governor-elect, said of Trump's account, I call complete BS, according to the Times. We even have a soundbite of him actually saying that.
That's bullshit.
But he does a terrific Greg Dworkin impression, and that's why it sounds like that. I was on a helicopter with Jerry Brown and Trump. It didn't go down, Newsom told the Times, saying that Trump repeatedly brought up the possibility of crashing. What if we crash? Wouldn't this be terrible? It would be terrible if we crashed. I don't know. I think he has a fear of that, and he has his own personal helicopter. Reportedly, he very rarely will fly anywhere on any other helicopters. He only trusts his own for whatever reason, like that one can't crash. Anyway, right-wing media figures have before denigrated Harris as a mistress for her previous relationship with Brown, despite it having occurred after Brown was separated from his wife and was not a secret, among other attacks. Trump, during Thursday's news conference, claimed Willie Brown was, quote, not a fan of Harris, and that he told him terrible things about her. I sincerely doubt it. Asked about those claims, Brown said, no, why would I? Give me a break, please. That's a pretty good answer. And it's the end of the report. That's as far as you can take that story. So anyway, I mean, he's a weirdo, and he spent his time saying weird things, and the press did spend an inordinate amount of time trying to figure out ways to make it sound more normal. That's just kind of what they do, and no one really knows why. Let's see. There's a couple of other such items. Did I save any of the other ones? I thought I did. But let me go back to Blue Sky and take a look, because there was a number of things here. By the way, I also saw SFDB this morning, reminding us all that August 9th is likewise another anniversary. This would be the 50th anniversary. August 9th, 1974, right? 2004. So 50 years ago today, Nixon resigns the presidency and leaves the White House. And now we have fat orange Nixon trying to get back into the White House, except he's considerably worse. But what's funny, of course, is that it's illustrated with the famous, two fingers up, right? V for victory, and the arms as well out in a V, so it's some sort of like V cubed here. But, the arms out boarding Marine One, the presidential helicopter, for the last ride out of the White House. Very famous photograph, but it involves a helicopter, so, the truth can now be revealed. Trump was on board that Marine One helicopter. They very famously had to make an emergency landing. They almost died. And Donald Trump deserves the Congressional Medal of Honor for his bravery. So, at least we have figured that part of it out. Now, it was also pointed out, by the way, just for historical context, it's Friday, I can do this. Let's see. Blue South on Blue Sky pointed out to me, this is not Trump's first helicopter story either. He just wants attention. White House correspondents are so effing stupid, but of course, this was the Pervalago correspondents. They're not White House correspondents. They're White House correspondents. If Trump wins, they go follow him in the White House. But anyway, doesn't matter. This one from the Trump files, and this one covered by Mother Jones years ago. Donald Trump's near-death experience, parentheses, that he invented. This is a Mother Jones piece from, one, written by Max Rosenthal, and two, dated June 19th, 2020, telling the story of, we can long story short this one, I think, but the story was of an actual helicopter crash in October 1989, in which a chartered helicopter crashed and killed 3 of Donald Trump's top executives. And, of course, he was, quite properly distraught over their deaths. However, it didn't stop him from using their deaths for a type of personal gain. He went to the press about it. I mean, they were going to be interested in the story anyway. It was a helicopter crash. And they went to him for comment, and his whole story about it was how he was thinking he was going to take that ride with him to Atlantic City, from New York City to Atlantic City, presumably to check up on the properties they were losing there. And but he, at the last moment, something just made him change his mind, and he didn't go. And isn't that lucky? Divine providence saved me, etc., or something. I'm clearly meant for something greater. Yada, yada. Anyway, that was the one where other Trump aides are like, yeah, he doesn't fly anywhere on any chartered helicopters. He only trusts his own helicopter. There were no plans for him to go. He didn't make a spur of the moment decision to try to go and then change his mind even after that tonight. So it was just sort of an interesting glimpse into his brain even then. The tragic death of 3 of my top executives. But let me tell you a little bit more about me and how I almost died. It's a bit of a tale. Okay, well, anyway, I'll include that for you if you want to take a look at it just for historical context. Other crazy things to touch on. There's an awful lot of them, but let's see. What can we fit in before the first break? How about this one? I don't know what to do with this one. It's an Ars Technica piece. Occasionally look their way. And I'll include this just for context of if you ever wonder about, am I going too far with accusing the Russians of doing something bizarre, then keep this one in mind. And it goes along with a lot of other stories. You'll recognize them right away. This one is reported this way. In world first, Russian chess player, they got a lot of those, a Russian chess player poisons his rivals or her rivals board with mercury. And the subheader here is, at least it wasn't Novichok. Nate Anderson covering this one for Ars Technica. Russia is no stranger to unique poisonings. State agents have been known to use everything from polonium-laced tea, yes, to the deadly nerve agent Novichok when making assassination attempts against both defectors in the UK and with internal political rivals like Alexei Navalny. But in a new first in the long history of poisonings, new first was opened this month in the Russian Republic of Dagestan, where a 40-something chess player named Amina Abakarova, maybe, I'm doing my best here, attempted to poison a rival by depositing liquid mercury on and around her chessboard. Malcolm Payne, perhaps, P-E-I-N, the English Chess Federation's Director of International Chess, told the UK's Telegraph that he had never seen anything like this before. This is the first recorded case of somebody using a toxic substance, to my knowledge. It is a toxic substance, you're right. But, okay, the first instance is the first in your knowledge. In the history of the game of chess, I have to believe it happened sometime earlier in and around a chessboard, but maybe for totally non-chess related reasons. Anyway, usually, he said, chess rivals confine themselves to the psychological tactics. Oliver Carroll, a Ukraine war correspondent for The Economist, summed up the situation with some social media snark. I know that on the standards of Russian doping, it's perhaps only a 7 out of 10, but still. Yeah, look out for the poisoning there. What can I tell you? Congratulations to Vladimir Putin for getting a great deal on mercury. He did it so cheap. Hi everybody, it's me, David Waldman. Yes, the same guy who interrupts you all the time. Interrupting you one more time just to tell you again, another reminder that your contributions are what keep this show on the air, and patreon.com, Patreon.com, is still among the easiest ways to make the sustaining subscription donations that keep us afloat. Are you ready for the pep talk about how our Patreon campaign is still going strong and growing? Well, too bad. Yeah, the plain fact is we actually are headed in the wrong direction, and whereas we once had about 175 monthly patrons, we're now actually down below 150. Time to recruit some more. Not exactly the kind of news I wanted to share, but there it is. For those of you in a position to support the show, Patreon.com does make it easy to make those secure, recurring monthly contributions to do so. Patreon.com/KagroX gets you straight to our donation page. We've been through a lot together. The worst of the pandemic, we hope. The worst of the insurrection, we hope. So go ahead and treat yourself. You don't need an excuse. Give yourself the gift of a little something you enjoy in life. Support the show. And of course, if you happen to prefer using PayPal or even the Square Cash app, we're up and running on those options too. So thanks again, everyone, for all your support. We couldn't, or at least shouldn't, do it without you. Hope you'll be on board soon too. Thanks for all your support. All right, welcome back now to the Kagro in the Morning Show here on Netroots Radio. So, okay, I think we can just say long story short on that one. She put mercury all over the chessboard, and I guess upon resuming the game, the opponent, who unfortunately we get to the part of the story where it's happening in a region and with players whose names I don't even know if I can even take a stab at. The Republic of Dagestan, apparently, we're talking about a venue near the Caspian Sea, not far from Azerbaijan, I guess. Okay, well, at any rate, players whose names are unpronounceable to me. Really, seriously. Apologies. I feel bad for you, of course, having been poisoned with mercury. But basically, sat down, started playing the game, and kind of immediately, I've also noticed the mercury, creeping out from underneath the board, little beads of mercury, which apparently if you breathe in the vapors, that's the issue, and you can immediately start feeling the toxic effects of it. Coughing, shortness of breath, and a metallic taste in the mouth, apparently, among the symptoms that she reported. So they were able to put 2 and 2 together, except that it must have taken them some time to get to the realization that, oh my God, a chess player has poisoned another chess player in the middle of all this. And Russian, too. Figures. It's just crazy. So I don't know. Next time we're speculating on how crazy the Russians will go and just what they'll pull, have that on file, will you? Because you never know with these guys. All right. So that's some Friday news for you. There's more, as it turns out. And I was going to scroll back a little further looking for it because, as I recall, there was, I think, a Philip Bump story yesterday about the press conference. And I didn't put it away, but if I scroll back far enough, I think I'll be able to find it. Yeah, here it is, his column. Well, he was distributing it anyway via social media if it isn't his column. But it is. That's what he usually distributes. Philip Bump writing in the Washington Post, Trump compares his January 6th crowd to the March on Washington. Which, again, I mean, Philip Bump's pretty good, and he doesn't write his headlines, I don't think. Most of the reporters and opinion writers don't. Although opinion should have more control, don't you think? Over that. And really, the headline should be, Donald Trump says effing crazy thing that's so demented you should be doubting his ability to function without daily care. And this is elder abuse. It is kids keep him out on the campaign trail to soak money out of other elderly people who don't have any control over what they're doing. Anyway, this gets the matter of fact. Trump compares his January 6th crowd to the March on Washington. Sure. But, if you don't know anything about it, that's fine. Trump compares his January 6th crowd to a Martian unicorn that he rode in that everybody remembers from inauguration, right? No. Everyone will know right away that's not true. As has traditionally been the case with such boasts, his crowd was smaller. This is the most antiseptic treatment you can give it, headline-wise. And that was the subheader. But okay, Philip Bump is usually on target with the writing. The very first fight Donald Trump picked with the media after being inaugurated as president was about crowd size. I think we all remember that. January 21st, 2017. Day after inauguration, Trump visited the CIA headquarters as a sort of olive branch after having disparaged the intelligence community's determination that Russia had worked to aid his election. While there, Trump claimed that 1.5 million people had been present for his speech the previous day, which was obviously false. His press secretary, Sean Spicer, gamely, remember him, attempted to defend the claim without success. As he seeks to be inaugurated again next January, Trump is again making bold, indefensible claims, you can say untrue, about crowd size. During a news conference on Thursday, though, the claim was about another January speech that he gave near the National Mall, the one that preceded the riot/insurrection, I would say, at the Capitol on January 6, 2021. The New York Times' Maggie Haberman questioned an assertion Trump made shortly beforehand that there was a peaceful transfer of power after the 2020 election. There wasn't. It's true. Trump used the question to talk about how many people came out to hear him speak that day. That's the obvious answer. I mean, that too is another thing. I'm annoyed by the fact that they said people had a press conference or that they interviewed Trump. No, you didn't. He speechified saying, spewing nonsense in possible response to things that you asked him, but it's not an interview and it's not a press conference. But okay, so he used it to the question, hey, you said there was a peaceful transfer of power in 2020 when there was in fact a violent insurrection in which people died. What about that? Well, I had a lot of people, more than Martin Luther King. The biggest crowd I've ever spoken before was that day, Trump said. And I'll tell you, it's very hard to find a picture of that crowd. One thing that's very hard to find pictures of is when millions and millions of people gather in the United States Capitol, particularly if it's then followed by a gigantic criminal conspiracy to overthrow the government of the United States in which hundreds of people have been prosecuted. Very hard to find a picture of that crowd. You see the picture of a small number of people, relatively, going to the Capitol. No, it's a large number. But you never see the picture of the crowd. The biggest crowd I've ever spoken breaks it off there. Biggest crowd I've ever spoken about, to, with. No. I've spoken to the biggest crowds. Nobody's spoken to crowds bigger than me. I mean, honestly. Then he went further, comparing the crowd to the one present for the March on Washington in August 1963. If you look at Martin Luther King, and by the way, remember, I think we've said it a number of times on the show, one of, roughly 16, 17 dozen Trump tells when he's lying, is if you look at, that's the signal that he doesn't quite know the facts about what he's talking about. But if you look at it, you'll know the facts, and then you'll see for him that he's totally correct. If you look at Martin Luther King, when he did his speech, the great speech, and you look at ours, same real estate, same everything, same number of people. If not, we had more, Trump said. And they said he had 1 million people, but I had 25,000 people. And apparently he chuckles, which is the first time I've heard about that in a long time. But when you look at the exact same picture, and everything's the same because it was the fountains, the whole thing, all the way back to from Lincoln to Washington. And you look at it, and you look at the picture of his crowd, my crowd, we actually had more people. I don't even know whether he goes on to analyze this any further, except to say no. But, I mean, that just wasn't where he was. It wasn't. Trump gave us, it was at the Ellipse, which is a different location entirely. And, I mean, remember, he's talking about a crowd that stretched from the steps of the Lincoln Memorial, where King gave his speech, that stretched all the way down to the Washington Monument. By the way, it isn't until you get to the other side of the Washington Monument that you even get near the Ellipse. But nothing like that. Nothing like that. Of course, Philip points out, he says, oh, we actually had a lot more people. He didn't. Trump is correct that there aren't many pictures of the crowd to which he spoke on January 6th, or at least there aren't a lot of aerial pictures that show the extent of the crowd. Instead, we mostly have street level or slightly elevated photos. Here, for example, is a video of the view that Trump might have seen when he was speaking. As with the crowd at the inauguration in 2017, the crowd looks more densely packed from ground level or slight elevation than it actually was because of foreshortening. That is a linked term here that will give you a definition if you care. But it's just a visual effect of the aerial photo versus the ground level photo. And it's a trick that advanced teams use all the time to make it look for the cameras and for the speaker like there's a densely packed crowd. But, you can't really see what's behind the crowd. And then you see some trees and then the Washington Monument. And so he's thinking, oh, this thing goes over the hill, down past the Washington Monument, all the way probably to the Lincoln Memorial, but nothing like that was happening. In this video, from a slightly higher vantage point, you can get a better sense of the spread of the crowd. And here he uses an embedded tweet that itself has an embedded video of the crowd, and, of course, claiming that there's a massive crowd. But from a camera to the side, Bump says, here, MSNBC's camera from that morning, you can see the crowd near the stage on the Ellipse south of the White House was fairly contained. Yes, they packed them together so that you get a good television shot, and that from certain angles it looks like, it's like the infinity pools, right? It would be like if you took Trump to an infinity pool and brought him in there, he would say, this is the biggest swimming pool in the world. It goes all the way, probably all the way, it certainly goes over the horizon, probably stretches around the globe. As a matter of fact, there's water behind me. So this is a remarkable achievement, a swimming pool that runs in a 8-foot wide ribbon all the way around the circumference of the globe, which is not a circumference because it's a sphere. Anyway, he doesn't know any of those words, but I mean, is he going to get fooled by that? Well, first of all, can we talk about water displacement? Put Trump in a swimming pool like that, an infinity pool, and it'll be difficult afterwards to get the water up to the level. Okay, well, anyway, when he gets back out, he'll see the difference. But, I have the biggest crowd ever. Stealth jets are made out of invisible metal. And, okay, sure, pal. You know exactly what's going on. Anyway, as they said, MSNBC's camera shows that the crowd was actually fairly contained. They usually put, like the bicycle rack barriers in the back there so that everybody crushes forward and it looks like a big crowd. I mean, it's big. It's just not Martin Luther King big. We know from the House Select Committee that he investigated the riot, by the way, that the Capitol... the riot at the Capitol, that Trump was unhappy with the orientation of his audience that morning. Interesting. The way that we would always try to build rallies was out long and narrow because that made for a better picture. White House staffer Cassidy Hutchinson explained to the committee in her sworn testimony that morning, though Trump was frustrated with how the people were spread so far out, she said, and with obstructions that made photographing the crowd difficult. This was why he wanted to skip the security screening process, as she famously testified, to more rapidly fill in the area in front of the stage. Trump, remember, by the way, can I just bring that up? Do you remember why Trump said not only did he want the crowd, he wanted to let the crowd in through the metal detectors, get rid of the metal detectors, one, so that there's a bigger crowd, and nobody's here to hurt me. They're not here to hurt me. I feel safe. Bring them in. And I just want to mention to you that Trump recently got shot at one of his rallies. So, maybe he's wrong about a couple of things. Anyway, he wanted to skip the security screening process to more rapidly fill in the area in front of the stage. Trump was furious with the situation, perhaps helping to explain the former president's lingering irritation about the photos, why he still remembers it. Regardless, the part of Trump's response in which he compares his crowd to King is flatly incorrect. Yes, King's speech did include a large crowd that occupied some of, quote, the same real estate, the space between the Washington Monument and the White House. You can see in the photo below from the Library of Congress that there are, in fact, people on the ellipse, but that's not where the main action was. It's hard to compare that section of the crowd to Trump's because of the different angles. You'll also notice that on the left side of the photo from 1963, there were several buildings that are no longer present, constructed to serve as office space during the World Wars. The last buildings were removed during the Nixon administration. Nixon himself, as a matter of fact, was removed during the Nixon administration. So it was a big time for that. It doesn't really matter. After all, you will recall that King spoke not from the ellipse south of the White House, but from the Lincoln Memorial. The distance between the Washington Monument and where Trump spoke on January 6, 2021 was about a third of a mile. The distance between the Washington Monument and where King spoke is about 3/4 of a mile, more than twice as long, and was packed with people, as can be seen in the photo below. Also from the Library of Congress, aerial photo of the crowd in front of the Lincoln Memorial. I mean, generally speaking, it's a tough area because the most of the expanse between the Lincoln Memorial and the Washington Monument is, of course, the reflecting pool. So there's a giant cutout in the middle of the viewing area that means the crowd has to pack itself into the walkways to the side. So it does have a very impressive effect. Trump didn't do anything like that. National Park Service estimated about 250,000 people attended King's speech, not 1 million. There was no similar estimate offered of the crowd at Trump's speech, but Trump presented one as soon as he began speaking that day. Media will not show the magnitude of this crowd, he said. Even when I turned on today, the TV, I looked, I saw thousands of people here, but you don't see hundreds of thousands of people behind you because they don't want to show that, and they're not there. What people remember from January 6th isn't that there were hundreds of thousands of people at his speech, since that's an exaggeration. What they remember instead is the thousands who swarmed Capitol Hill, and the nearly 1,500, as of this writing, who would ultimately face federal charges for participating in that riot. King's speech is remembered for what he said. Trump's is remembered for what it preceded. So, there's that too. Okay. Crazy. I told you there was some courtroom doings, and we should probably get to a couple of those. I mentioned to you that the case has been remanded to Tanya Chutkin's courtroom in the district court in D.C., and how she was looking to get things restarted in a hurry. But it looks like things might actually end up slowing down a little bit anyway, and perhaps at Jack Smith's request. Let me update you on that. The straight reporting on it from the Hill, Rebecca Beach, who brought us the story of Chutkan's interest in speeding things along that we read yesterday. We now have this one. Smith seeks to delay deadlines in Trump January 6th case. Special counsel Jack Smith asked for additional time to settle how to proceed with former President Trump's January 6th prosecution, asking to bump back a swift set of deadlines ignited when the case returned to a lower court. I think it was probably in everybody's best interest for Chutkan to say, well, let's get started real quick and not delay any further, and we'll let the parties do the asking for any delays rather than me imposing delays. And sure enough, they did ask. And it's a tall order. It's going to be a tough situation, both briefing and preparing for any hearings on these questions, because as we discussed yesterday, it's a novel thing. This theory espoused by the Supreme Court has never existed before and shouldn't exist now. So it's awfully difficult to know exactly how to approach this thing. Chutkan does the best she can to say, I'm open to any approach that the parties want to bring. I just judge. It's up to the parties to decide how they want to try to do it, and I can tell you yes or no, but I'm wide open to whatever you want to do. District Court Judge Tanya Chutkan had ordered Smith and Trump's attorneys to jointly propose how to move forward in the case after the Supreme Court handed the former president a victory in determining he has some protection from prosecution as a past executive. By requesting a 3-week delay in that filing, Smith is likely to disappoint those who have called for him to ask for an evidentiary hearing with live witness testimony ahead of the election. And I think that's what everybody, listening yesterday kind of wanted to hear was going to be the case, that he would present or ask for such an evidentiary hearing. Why does the delay imply that this wouldn't happen at least before the election? Well, any delay implies that you won't have a lot of time before the election, because the election's coming really soon. What Greg was saying, 90 days or so. By the way, I'm starting the countdown to Trump's sentencing. 90 days to the election, 40 days to his sentencing. So that's something to look forward to and to count down as we go. It also shows that Smith's team is still grappling with the best path forward after the Supreme Court ruled that Trump is immune from prosecution for core actions he took as president and presumptively immune for all other official acts. The government continues to assess the new precedent set forth last month in the Supreme Court's decision in Trump v. United States, Smith's team wrote in the filing. Although those consultations are well underway, the government has not finalized its position on the most appropriate schedule for the parties to brief issues related to the decision. The filing notes Trump's team did not object to the request. Of course not. Smith proposed that the two parties weigh in on August 30th rather than Friday. I don't know whether that was supposed to be today. In order for to get 3 weeks delay out of it, I think it had to be today that they were thinking of. I thought it was next Friday. But okay, August 30th to make it 3 weeks. Yeah, I guess so. The August 16th hearing scheduled by Chutkan would likewise need to be delayed. Okay, so that's what I was thinking of. Next Friday would be is it Friday? There will be the hearing next week, but today was the deadline, I guess, for briefs in advance of that hearing, or at least the first in a series of hearings. Smith is faced with difficult choices following the Supreme Court's decision, including whether to narrow the charges brought within the indictment. The court explicitly barred prosecutors from weighing Trump's pressure campaign at the Justice Department, which is amazing, where he planned to install a new attorney general who would investigate his baseless claims of election fraud. Trump is absolutely immune from prosecution for the alleged conduct involving his discussions with Justice Department officials, the court wrote, although they should have capitalized court in this one, adding that the executive branch has absolute discretion to decide which crimes to investigate and prosecute, which is, a real change in the way we have always understood the independence of the Justice Department. But it was always more of a norm than a rule of any sort. Well, it was written down as a rule for the Justice Department, but it's certainly not a legal requirement. Even Trump's pressure campaign on former President Mike Pence involves official conduct, the court wrote, adding that Trump is presumptively immune on the matter. The court also went a step further, writing that courts may not inquire into the president's motives, which is insane, raising questions over to what extent those plots may serve as evidence in the case. Still, some legal observers eager to see Trump prosecuted saw a silver lining in the case, suggesting Smith call for an evidentiary hearing with witnesses in order to determine what aspects of the indictment cover official acts versus private behavior. Norm Eisen, who served as counsel for Democrats in Trump's first impeachment, we learned yesterday, or we knew already anyway, we were reminded yesterday, said such a hearing would serve as a mini-trial of Trump to allow the public to better understand the case against him shortly before the election. We should have had a verdict long ago, so the least the judicial system can do is give us the mini-trial to some extent, air the allegations, and offer a determination of whether they're immune or not. Beyond the Justice Department's own internal deliberations, Smith outlines other challenges impeding the case, noting that Trump's legal team would be unavailable the week of September 16th, when Trump is set to face sentencing in his New York hush money trial. So how about that for a conflict? Well, we can't come and face these criminal charges. We're going to be somewhere else facing other criminal charges. It's not the greatest excuse in the world, but it is true. He will be busy. I think I also parked something from Empty Wheel, which is always a bit of a risk because, she gets into details that sometimes sidetrack things. I gave it a skim earlier today, her treatment of Jack Smith asking for this extension. And I think if I skip over the included excerpts from the briefs, which are, themselves dense with legal jargon, that's important for her and for her audience, and it makes sense to go through them. But I think for the purposes of catching up with the news story and fitting in more of Marcy's analysis, for the most part, we'll skip over it. She writes, Judge Tanya Chutkin was clearly ready to get the prosecution of Donald Trump back on the road. The day after she got the SCOTUS mandate from its immunity ruling, she set a deadline for a status report and a status conference, and denying, for now, until all issues of immunity are settled, Trump's challenge to the application of the law, 18 U.S. Code 1512C2. No, we won't get into that. Let's get right to the briefings and status conferences. But yesterday, Jack Smith asked for more time, citing the need to consult with other parts of DOJ before proposing a way forward. How he phrases it is excerpted here. Of course, no one knows why Smith might need the delay. By far the most obvious, however, has to do with how the D.C. U.S. Attorney's Office plans to apply the law going forward after the SCOTUS limited its application, or the application of obstruction charges, in the Fisher case to matters pertaining to the evidence. Two of Trump's charges are obstruction, one charged as a conspiracy, the other individually. Thus far, DOJ has dealt with the crime scene cases implicating obstruction on a case-by-case basis. Those before Carl Nichols, the judge whose outlier ruling was adopted by the SCOTUS, are getting dismissed. But some others are getting delayed. Still others are getting recharged under 18 U.S. Code 231 for rioting. Sentencing involving obstructions are likewise being delayed. As Justice Ketanji Brown Jackson noted in her concurring opinion on the obstruction ruling, because the vote certification involved the electoral certifications themselves, some of those crime scene cases might survive this ruling. Again, a small excerpt from her ruling. This might be worth running through here. That official proceeding, I guess the counting of the electoral votes, plainly used certain records, documents, or objects, including, among others, those relating to the electoral votes themselves, many of which were forged, right? They tried to deliver some that were forged. The ones that made it to the floor were not forged. And it might well be that Fisher's conduct, the other defendant who had a Supreme Court case, as alleged here, involved the impairment or the attempted impairment of the availability or integrity of things used during the January 6th proceedings in ways other than those specified in the statute under which he was originally charged. If so, then Fisher's prosecution under a different section can and should proceed. That issue remains available for the lower courts to determine on remand. So, even in the Fisher case, there's something for the lower courts to reconsider. DOJ has always argued that this was possible, but it's likely only possible, if at all, for those defendants who knew the import of the certificates themselves. And that might not be all of them. For Trump, however, the continued exposure is far broader, as Justice Amy Coney Barrett noted in her concurrence on the immunity ruling, because by orchestrating the fake elector certificates, Trump created a fraudulent document. And DOJ needs to figure out how these two potential bases... What's going on? Sorry. Okay. That's all right. Hey, you want to throw some of that in here? All right, well, little accident in the background. No big deal. As DOJ needs to figure out how these two potential bases will interact going forward. Bases, that is, the bases of these crimes. Likely, the U.S. Attorney's Office also had to consult with the Solicitor General's office to figure out what they think will survive appeal, including how an obstruction charge built on the fake electors would survive. So that's probably a big cause of the delay. DOJ as a whole has to settle on how they'll deal with obstruction going forward in light of Fisher. Charges for some crime scene defendants may depend on how Smith approaches obstruction charges against Trump. But I'm mindful, Marcy says, of something else. Jack Smith asked for a delay until August 30th, 3 weeks plus 1 day from the original deadline. That's the last day of the month, or I guess probably the last business day of the month, because there's a 31st in August, right? But it's the last day of the month, and that may be the only reason Smith asked for that date. It's also probably the last day that DOJ would, at least I'll say ordinarily would, permit charging anyone political before the election. That is, as has happened with some crime scene defendants, DOJ may be considering recharging this case or charging others against whom some of these charges would stick. And aside from the possibility of charging a bunch of Trump's co-conspirators, that allows for one very provocative possibility. Can we sneak that very provocative possibility in before the break? Let's see. Justice John Roberts explicitly said that an acquittal on impeachment, remember that, doesn't rule out charging that same count criminally. There's a little excerpt here, but I mean, duh. It was discussed at the Constitutional Convention, so okay. So if Jack Smith originally avoided the insurrection charge against Trump to avoid any claim that Trump's impeachment acquittal ruled that out, he has no such worry now. That's cool. Let's try it. All right, welcome back now to the Kagro in the Morning Show here on Netroots Radio. Just a short break at the top of the hour. And, so this is the exciting part of Empty Wheels, very deep. It's actually not even all that deep of a dive by Marcy standards, but a good one and a good different angle on what's going on here. Let me start over with this section because it's kind of interesting. This is the good stuff, right? The intriguing thing to her is, or the provocative possibility, Justice Roberts said that an acquittal on impeachment doesn't rule out charging the same count criminally. And he should say that because it doesn't. But I guess that was one of the claims that Trump was making. It's a very, weird reading of the Constitution, and the court didn't agree with it. And I guess the statement that Roberts makes is that impeachment is a political process by which Congress can remove a president who has committed treason, bribery, or other high crimes and misdemeanors, right? Directly out of Article 2. Section 4. Transforming that political process into a necessary step in the enforcement of criminal law finds little support in the text of the Constitution or the structure of our government. In other words, one of the few prior understandings that actually survived this whole incident from the insurrection itself all the way through the Supreme Court's rulings on these things. So, Marcy picks back up. If Jack Smith originally avoided the insurrection charge against Trump, remember that among the many things he was charged with, he was not charged with insurrection directly, right? And if he avoided that because in order to avoid any claim that Trump's impeachment acquittal would rule out such a charge. I don't know why he would have done that. I mean, that's one of those things that, like, well, duh, there's no way that it does. But in this era of finding out that you're pre-wrong about everything, maybe he didn't want to risk it. But I don't know. I find that absurd. Like, why wouldn't you want to get a ruling on that? I don't really know whether he ever said anything that would make Marcy believe that he did do that. But I guess this is possible. It's why didn't he charge him with insurrection, right? One possibility is that he thought that it would give Trump the ability to argue that his acquittal in the impeachment trial means he can't be charged now. But that's just not true. So I don't know why he avoids it, but we'll throw that out as a possibility. What's more exciting, I guess, is we either get around to it in the next section here, is the section of the law that he would actually be charged with. The insurrection statute is one that you're familiar with as a longtime listener to the show. As the per curiam... she concludes, we read this before the break. If Jack Smith originally avoided the insurrection charge in order to avoid any claim from Trump that his impeachment acquittal ruled the charge out, he has no such worry now. As the per curiam opinion in the Colorado disqualification case noted, you remember 14th Amendment, Colorado Secretary of State says, yeah, insurrectionists can't be on the ballot, and he's an insurrectionist, so you're out. And they came back and said, oh, yeah, well, that whole Section 3 doesn't really apply anymore because reasons or whatever. So in that opinion, the Colorado disqualification opinion, insurrection remains on the books. I mean, they didn't erase the statute. She says, I need to refer back to the hearing transcript, but someone like Justice Sammy Alito made the same observation at that hearing. And here an excerpt that reads, and the Confiscation Act of 1862, we haven't been discussing that, but they were talking about it at the time, which predated Section 3 of the 14th Amendment, right, effectively provided an additional procedure for enforcing disqualification. They're talking about the history of laws that have existed that included, yeah, you're disqualified from being on the ballot, just to try to compare that with the claim about what the 14th Amendment Section 3 said. So it's not from out of the blue. There were other previous laws that included disqualification and even had mechanisms for enforcing them. And how shall we compare the two and decide on the viability of Section 3? That law that predated Section 3 made engaging in insurrection or rebellion, among other acts, a federal crime punishable by disqualification from holding office under the United States. A successor to those provisions remains on the books today at 18 U.S. Code Section 2383. Does that ring a bell for anybody? If not, I can read it to you. Section 2383 reads, rebellion or insurrection, whoever incites, sets on foot, assists or engages in any rebellion or insurrection against the authority of the United States or the laws thereof, or gives aid or comfort thereto, shall be fined under this title or imprisoned not more than 10 years, or both, and shall be incapable of holding any office under the United States. Okay. So that's pretty straightforward. In fact, I guess it trails off here in terms of the Google hit on it. But, yeah, I mean, I shall be incapable of holding any office under the United States. Actually, that's it. So it does trail off, but they didn't put the final period on it. That's the whole thing. Of course, sets on foot, like I said, it's like he set out to purposefully violate that part of the statute to make sure it was applicable to him. Why hasn't anybody charged him with it? I guess there was one possible legal barrier, but that legal barrier has since been removed. Amazingly, the one thing the Supreme Court did that we haven't been talking about is make it clear that that statute can still apply. Nothing about impeachment acquittal obviates that statute. So I've been wanting that charge to come for a long time. It would be really great if it did, but it seems awfully unlikely just because we're back up against the wall here, and DOJ if they follow the rules, and why would they at this point? But if they follow their old rules and their old norms, I mean, Trump isn't going to, well, anyway. Right, the guy who's proposing to Schedule F everybody right the hell out of the DOJ, that's an alphabet soup for you, is like, yeah, follow the rules, everybody. Don't charge me. You're not allowed to follow those rules. The president isn't in charge of the DOJ. He can't just tell them what to do unless the president is me. Anyway, so there you go. I'm glad they're back to the sets on foot statute. Good old Section 2383. I've always rooted for that one. Recharging this case to include insurrection is the exact equivalent to what DOJ is doing elsewhere, replacing an obstruction charge with a rioting charge. And it would be consistent with the inclusion of a Proud Boy prosecutor, one of the prosecutors of the Proud Boys, not a prosecutor who's a Proud Boy, on the Trump case, which I suspect to have occurred. So maybe yes, maybe no. Again, by far the most likely explanation for the delay. And she puts italics on that. Did she link into something? It looks like, maybe just italics are colored on her blog. Most likely explanation, in her opinion anyway, for the delay is that DOJ is just trying to figure out what to do with the Section 1512 charges against Trump and all the crime scene defendants. But the three SCOTUS opinions, immunity, Section 1512, the obstruction stuff, the Fisher case, and the 14th Amendment case, explicitly leave this possibility. The immunity provision does not exclude charges on which Trump has been acquitted in an impeachment. Elsewhere, DOJ is replacing obstruction with rioting charges, and the 14th Amendment ruling explicitly noted that insurrection remains good law. So it is a possibility, and a possibility that would have to be considered by August 30th. So, it might be hopium, but, you got to put the possibility out there. If we find ourselves at the end of August facing that, everyone will say, where the hell did this come from? Except people who heard the show or read Empty Wheel independently, and there are many who do. But I think I see where she's going with all this. I mean, it's a big if. But, recharging the cases is happening. DOJ is definitely doing that with other people. And I guess maybe the reasoning here, or the argument for why then double back, I don't know why you didn't charge him with insurrection in the first place. And it might have been smarter to do that then. They might even have gotten a better outcome. If the Supreme Court justices were at all embarrassed by what they were doing, which they were not, they might have, Amy Coney Barrett was. She might have been more persuasive with them at that point had that been the case. But coming out of the case, right? He's immune from official acts, core acts of the presidency, things that are official, etc., and has presumptive immunity for all other official things, but no immunity for unofficial acts. Well, what could be more unofficial than an act that caused the House of Representatives to impeach you? Yes, you were acquitted, but it's a political process, not a criminal process. So certainly, there was a point at which Trump was arguing that it would have been double jeopardy to charge him criminally with insurrection, given that he was acquitted in his impeachment. But one, he wasn't charged with insurrection directly in the impeachment. Two, it's not a criminal charge. So it's not a double jeopardy issue, but he's saying, I'm immune because it was an official act, and Smith will have at least the ability to argue, well, that's not the way Congress saw it. Though they wouldn't acquit you, or they did eventually acquit you, that's as much a political act as weighing real evidence. Basically, they were saying, in our view, at least in the House of Representatives, in our view, you've done something not only unofficial, but so unofficial that we wanted to remove you from office after you'd already left office, by the way, with an eye toward what then? We couldn't remove you from office by impeaching you, knowing that the trial would be held after you had left office. But we could do what? What other remedy was still available to them under the impeachment clause? Disqualification from office. And that's the other half of everything that Empty Wheel was pointing to. Yes, we can come back to that. Disqualification from office on account of insurrection is still good law, despite the fact that they decided that the Secretary of State of Colorado was not the person who should decide innocence or guilt on that question. Okay, so there. That's pretty complex. You've just been to law school. Congratulations, everybody. Punch and cookies in the back. Good job. You graduated. All right, what else have we got? I mentioned to you that there was, man, damn it, there's so many other stupid things I want to get to. But I mentioned to you that there was something thematic and terrible that I had to bring to your attention from Florida. Although it may turn out that one of the articles, because it's from the Miami Herald, may be unreadable, but we'll give it our best at least to tell you what's going on here. But one element of all of this is what's happening is the fallout from both the weird experiment at New College in Florida, right, where they had a very interesting and very, liberal-leaning, I guess, faculty and administration. They had a nice little small liberal arts college in the state system there, and Ron DeSantis took over as governor and decided to do the war on woke thing because he wanted to run for president, and he was spectacularly unsuccessful in that. So I guess maybe he thinks he's salvaging his legacy by just saying, well, I'm still going to, have a war on woke here in Florida. And then when Trump dies or whatever, maybe I'll run for dictator or whatever the office is called. Then maybe people will have forgotten about my Smurf boots by then. I don't know. So he continues his war on woke, but in a bid for the, to be the biggest warrior on woke so that he might be able to run for president, he pulled this thing off. He took over the state university systems and tried to impose all sorts of, all the little controls that he wanted over kindergartners' books. He wanted to impose over college students as well. You can't have the woke, and we're getting rid of these books, and you're not allowed to protest for Palestine, and, no gay stuff. Well, I don't know. But basically, he was getting around to that, and was going to, politically screen all the professors, and you're not allowed to have tenure if you're liberal or whatever. It was insane, and it was destroying, or at least held out the possibility of destroying the state higher education system. Professors were fleeing. They have faculty crisis, tenured and world-renowned faculty members were fleeing Florida, looking for work elsewhere, leaving a weird empty shell of a faculty behind in some of these places, et cetera, et cetera. So all of it is kind of coming crashing down all at once. And I got to scroll back, I think, to find each of these things, but yeah, I wish I could have positioned them all together someplace in some way. But there's definitely a bunch of these things happening all at once. Let me start then with, which one? Let me start with Don Moynihan's Substack, I think, kind of maybe does sort of a 10,000-foot overview on all of this stuff. If I can go back to it's an August 17th entry. His Substack? It is called Can We Still Govern? And I've borrowed from it in the past, and a lot of his thoughts shared on social media very often point me to this work. New College, as I mentioned, is a warning about the price of populist incompetence. The subheader says, what happens when inexperienced radicals can't run public services? We can't govern. That's the Republican mantra. But, of course, the other mantra is we don't want to govern. Governance is bad, which, by the way, is a huge warning sign. I think just the other day someone was pointing out that Chris Sununu of New Hampshire had, riffed on one of the favorite themes since the Ronald Reagan days about government and governance and what Republicans think of it, that government can't solve your problems. Government's not here to solve your problems. And I think I just saw it the other day that a blue skyer retweeted that, reskeeted that along with the comment that actually is exactly the reason we have government. As a matter of fact, it's the exact opposite. This government is supposed to try to solve your problems. Here it is. Who says it? Silly.bluesky.social. Becca Dagu, if you try to pronounce this out loud, his screen name, saying, yeah, that's literally exactly what it's here for. It's a screen cap of Chris Sununu speaking directly to the camera, and the quote here, government is not here to solve your problems. That's literally exactly what it's here for. There's really no reason to have ceded all of our collective power through the consent of the governed to a government if it isn't here to solve our problems. If it's just here to collect taxes and beat us up, well, we don't need that. We can abolish that and just go back to living warlordism as we used to in the day, whatever that day was. Anyway, so that happened. Let me open that up so that I can share it with everybody as we do the recap. But now, Don Moynihan was going to make some sense of all of this. He starts off with a riff off of what I think, as I recall, if I recall correctly, is The Great Gatsby, and substituting in the names of the players here. They were careless people, Rufo and DeSantis, right? They smashed up things and creatures and then retreated back into their ideology or their vast carelessness or whatever it was that kept them together and let other people clean up the mess that they had made. As I recall, Great Gatsby, right? I think so. It's unattributed, but that much I remember. Competence, the ability to perform organizational core tasks, is an underrated quality. In its presence, we take it for granted. We miss it only in its absence. It is an especially overlooked quality by people who value other things, like ideological goals, or people who believe that existing institutions are fundamentally corrupt for whatever reason, or people who have never actually run things. And when you put those people in charge of our institutions, the price of incompetence suddenly looms large. We are witnessing this right now with the gross mismanagement of New College in Florida, a public college that Ron DeSantis turned into a pet project. The idea was to turn this institution into a conservative bulwark akin to Hillsdale College in Michigan. Instead, it has become a testament to populist incompetence, to the vast breadth between breezy platitudes about transforming higher education and the reality of running a real institution with real students. And by the way, Hillsdale College, if I can look this up quickly, I mean, we've heard that name called an awful lot. But it is a private college. It's not a public institution. And, they're a fundamental failing right away. That again, Chris Rufo and Ron DeSantis can't be convinced that it is improper use of state power to turn a public institution into one that they will, seek to have mimic a private institution. Public institution just isn't supposed to have that kind of freedom to do these sorts of things. It's an improper use of government power, but they don't care about the rules. So they're just going to force it to happen the best they can. And when they are set back occasionally by courts, they'll either just bulldoze through or just seek retribution elsewhere somehow. You'll see how, I think. But yes, it has instead become a testament to populist incompetence, the vast breadth between breezy platitudes about transforming higher education and the rules surrounding it, and the reality of running a real institution with real students. As the new semester starts, New College is an administrative disaster. 1/3 of faculty have gone. Students cannot find classes. Students with housing contracts are being relocated to an airport hotel. The mismanagement of the New College is entirely predictable. Before I even go on with that one, I think the response that Rufo and company are giving to this, this ordinarily is something that conservatives care about. Contracts mean something to them, right? Students with housing contracts are being relocated to an airport hotel. For one thing, they may say, well, that's fine. They got a place to sleep. They're not homeless. What's the big deal, right? But we have a contract for housing on campus, right? A contract. And Republicans honor contracts. That's the stability. That's the essence of conservatism is the honoring of that kind of private contracting. Even if you're having a private contract with a state entity, honoring that contract is a big, big deal for real conservatives. But their answer to that is, who cares? They're liberal students. Time for some housing problems in Fort Lee College, essentially, is what's happening here. They don't care about the sanctity of contract when the sanctity of contract would inure to the benefit of some liberal idiot kid. And if they're also happen to be personally conservative, oh, well, look, you got to break eggs to make some omelets. So that's essentially, that's a huge problem right there. But anyway, the mismanagement of the college is entirely predictable. It is a product of the DeSantis School of Public Management. Experienced administrators pushed out, replaced by political cronies. The new president of New College is a former GOP House Speaker, who was handed a salary of more than double that of his predecessor. The new dean of students, a lobbyist. Sure, why not? Trustees of the college were selected for their ideological leanings rather than any experience they had. Faculty feel excluded given the hostile messaging from and of the new trustees. Cancellation of entire major subjects of study for ideological reasons. No women's studies, that's dumb. That's an ideological reason, apparently. It's dumb. What an ideology. And the preemptory denial of tenure by the same trustees to 5 faculty members without any actual review. Who cares? We make the rules. So, boom. No tenure for you. Existing students are voting with their feet. By August 1st, more than 10% of the student body had already transferred to Hampshire College, a small Massachusetts, not New Hampshire, but Hampshire College in Massachusetts, a small liberal arts program that offered New College students the option to transfer. They saw the crisis and turned it into opportunity for themselves. Johanna Alonso, a reporter at Inside Higher Ed, has documented these failures. It's linked herein. You should take a look. So much of this smacks as absolute indifference and even contempt for students and an unwillingness to acknowledge that anything is wrong. For example, one departing faculty member offered to continue to cover key classes over Zoom. Administrators were initially responsive, but then declined her offer, which she suspects was due to her criticism of the new regime. And so students will have fewer options. But who cares? They're like, well, everyone should major in business anyway, or philosophy, and which is taught by Chris Rufo, I guess. Her beliefs that trustees blocked her from teaching is completely plausible. Chris Rufo, one of those trustees, boasted about the firing of adjunct faculty members after certain ones anyway, after they criticized the changes that he and his fellow ideologues have made. Embedded here is a tweet from Chris Rufo in which he says, New College of Florida has let the contract for visiting Professor Eric Wallenberg expire. He will not be returning to the campus. I wish Professor Wallenberg well and hope his work on radical theater and environmental movements finds a more suitable home. Okay, well, you're not supposed to really work that way. You're supposed to be bigger than that. Very publicly firing faculty out of pique when you are creating massive teaching holes is incompetence. But Rufo is still encouraging faculty who disagree with him to leave. Another embedded tweet here, including a link to a newspaper or magazine article, I can't tell which. A semester inside the siege, New College professor is trapped in the takeover. He responds to this saying, this is a ridiculous framing. No professor is trapped at New College. Faculty members who oppose the classical liberal arts and want to maintain an ideological echo chamber are free to do so at another institution. Rufo is now soliciting new faculty on Twitter. I need college professors. So he goes on basically, hey, anybody want to teach college? I'll hire you. Cat turd, sure. Why not, right? Because I can hire anyone I want. Rufo soliciting for new faculty on Twitter, asking for personal recommendations. Let me just note, Don says, that involving political appointees with zero expertise in research areas that you're hiring for is also incompetence. Texas A&M learned this lesson the hard way when they were forced to pay out $1 million when their regents employed an ideological litmus test to block the hire of a journalism professor that they viewed as too liberal. And here's how Chris Rufo, literally, honest to God, this is how he's trying to fill up faculty vacancies at New College, an actual college. He tweets, New College of Florida will be hiring a large cohort of new tenure-track faculty in the following departments. Help me find the best people who are committed to our mission of restoring the classical liberal arts, i.e. the conservative ones, I guess. Drop me recommendations, links, and CVs. And he just lists it. Natural science, it's like a shopping list. Natural sciences, biology, chemistry, and then parenthetically, X2, times 2. I need 2 of them. Computer science, times 2. Data science / statistics, times 2. Environmental studies, marine biology, mathematics, neuroscience. Really, anybody know any professors of neuroscience or people who want to say they are? Oh, cat turd, you're up for it? Fine, you're hired. Hooray. Problem solved.
Sup, fam? It's your boy Darwin, a.k.a. Darwin_Darko, a.k.a. the most reasonable man in America, a.k.a. KITM's senior black correspondent. You might remember me from such recordings as Spacemen vs. Space Cadets and We Need to Talk About Joe Biden. Today, I want to bring you good news about that thing you've been struggling with. Do you suffer from giving too much of a damn? Do you turn on the series of tubes and find yourself outraged at the particular way some news organization strung some sentences together only to realize, nope, this is not some fictional hellscape? Well, guess what? You no longer have to accept the life of giving too much of a damn. You can do something about it, because even you, yes you, can be a show contributor. Now I know what you're thinking. Hey, Mr. Most Reasonable Man in America, I'm not some professional podcast talking guy. Don't worry about it. Do you have a smartphone or some other electronic recording device? Well, that's all you need. You too can have a segment where you can read us an important article and give us your take. Read one of your own original essays, or even just give us your commentary on something you'd like to share that's important to you. Fair warning though, side effects may include general punditry, having opinions and hot takes, getting stuff off your chest, and hearing your own voice. If your recording lasts longer than 5 to 7 minutes, please consult kagrox@gmail.com. That's KAGROX@gmail.com.
All right, welcome back now to the Kagro in the Morning Show. You're on Ad Roots Radio. Let's go a little further with Don Moynihan's recounting of what's happening at New College in Florida, where we were just complaining, quite rightly, about Chris Rufo and his idiotic plans. Rufo has considerable skill as a propagandist, but he has no experience in higher education beyond advocacy against materials that relate to gender or race. He doesn't like that being taught anywhere. He didn't want it to be taught to kindergartners. It wasn't. He didn't want it taught to grade school kids. It wasn't. He didn't want it taught to high school kids. And also that wasn't also, by the way. So critical race theory not taught at really below the post-secondary educational level. But whatever, he had some complaints. They resonated politically. Some political contests, some election campaign races were won, and so therefore something. He's an expert on education. He doesn't live in Florida. They import him there and say, you run education for me. I know that I don't want it to be woke. I heard that you were popular from complaining about it being woke. Come here and run it. Again, it's just like plucking cat turd off of Twitter and saying, you're Secretary of Education. Go for it, man. Do what you want to do. And here's what happens. Rufo has considerable skills as a propagandist, but none in higher education, beyond complaining about what he doesn't like about higher education. So he pushed for the removal of gender studies from New College. His fellow trustees might have supported it, but abruptly removing majors in ways that are at odds with the demands and interests of, students, the customers, essentially, as conservatives like to think of it when they're reframing issues of education, the customers, The students wanted it, and that, again, is administrative incompetence. Doesn't mean he has to give in to every one of their demands, but if there are 100 people there who are paying tuition to study the major of their choice and they want it to be gender studies, why not? You could try and clamp down on the content of the curriculum, but why tell them the thing you came here to study no longer exists just to spite you? Well, it creates a sense of instability and indifference to student interests. It furthers the rush of faculty to the exit. It also makes it harder to hire qualified applicants. One professor at New College said, the division chairs, I guess like the department chairs, have made a heroic effort this summer to fill the gaps in our academic programs. Sadly, their efforts are being hampered by an ideological litmus test imposed by the administration. Beyond offering classes, another basic task of a university is to house its students. This should not be so complicated. This is the sort of thing like, well, why aren't conservatives? We need a businessman in the White House. This ain't complicated. This is a very basic transaction. But you can't manage it. Why can't you? I thought you were into, running everything like a business. We need to run this college like a business. We need a businessman in charge of these things. Well, he never claimed to be a businessman, but maybe that's why you shouldn't have hired him for it. He was a propagandist first and foremost, and you should have left it at that. But anyway, beyond offering classes, right, there's the task of housing your students. So, shouldn't be complicated. After all, it's not an ideological minefield, right? I can't house students because some of them once thought that somebody who was gay wasn't bad, and you know how it is. Then they fall out of the bed all the time, and we can't have that. It's a liability issue. There's nothing. It's not an ideological minefield. But again, rash choices lead to bad outcomes. The new trustees have convinced themselves that New College will become a liberal arts sports powerhouse. Because why not, right? And previously we're talking about a college with about 700 students. Well, we're going to become a sports powerhouse. Because sports, that's manly. That's not got any of that dumb gender stuff. Manliness is a gender thing, but nah, that doesn't count. Gender means chicks. We hate that. And maybe even gay people, which is not really what gender is all about. You're complaining about transgender people, but that has too many letters, and I don't even know LG something something. They love to profess confusion about the letters. I mean, I actually have confusions beyond Q. I can't remember. I know it goes QIA, but sometimes things change, and I wish I could keep up. But no, they're lost on the LG. After that, I don't know what's going on. Sure. So there you go. Trustees have convinced themselves that they'll become a sports powerhouse because that involves weightlifting and doing tough stuff, I guess. And so half of the entering freshman class this year are student athletes, which, by itself, great. The Olympics, people are inspired, but what does it mean? Why did that happen? It happens to the exclusion of other kinds of students. Half the freshman class are student athletes. So what happens? The fallout is this. New College, 700 or so students. New College now has 70 baseball players. About twice as many, by the way, as the University of Florida's Division I baseball team, right? That's an awful lot of scholarship baseball players. I don't think you can carry that many on your roster. It doesn't make any sense. The fallout then being, well, what do you do to house your students? And what they're doing, of course, is, well, we're recruiting you here. We're going to pay for you to come here to play baseball in a program that doesn't really exist yet at the Division III level, et cetera, yada, yada. Basically, we're giving all the dorm rooms to the baseball players. The rest of you students who just study and go to class, F you, go live at the airport. That's what happened. Now, let's set aside the wisdom of throwing resources at the hopes of transforming a small liberal arts college with no sports facilities or even any membership in the National Association of Intercollegiate Athletics and transforming it into a mecca for sports. And let's ignore the fact that this decision appears to be motivated in no small part by a desire to give scholarships to bring more men to campus while lowering academic standards. About 2/3 of New College students are currently women. The trustees have decided to eliminate the concentration in gender studies and instead start new programs in sports psychology, classical liberal arts, right? As well as finance and communications, classical liberal arts, in order to appeal to their athlete students. Hardly topics that are at the heart of a classical liberal education. In short, the trustees have decided to serve the students that they believe should be at New College while not supporting the students that are actually there. And I mean, you can change the vision and direction of the school, but the responsible thing to do is let's get the students who came here with this expectation and are in their third year or whatever through to graduation, and we can start concentrating on these new things. That's true. But of course, they wanted to pull the plug on the people who are there and just serve the people that they brought in, and that's just not responsible. It's not an adult way to do things. The decision to prioritize athletics have had immediate effects on housing. The new athletes have been given the housing that's traditionally reserved for juniors and seniors. These students who had contracts for campus housing are being moved. The campus has rented out an entire airport hotel to accommodate them. Students without vehicles can look forward to a walk on a busy highway to get to campus. One student said that he decided to leave New College largely in part due to the mismanagement of the housing situation. I thought, oh my God, how many other people might have gotten that same email of, hey, you're basically on your own, kid. It just shows that they have not committed to what's in the best interest of the student body. It's so wrong, the way they've gone about it. The disorganization, I can't wrap my brain around it. This is not how you run a college. Quite. Meanwhile, the New York Times recently featured Rufo on its opinions page, where he penned an essay about the risks to liberal colleges. The chief risk, of course, DEI programs. Right, I probably should have gone with the horror dramatic on that one. Here is a screenshot of his July 27th, 2023 entry. I guess it's not all that recent. DEI programs are getting in the way of a liberal education, he writes. Okay. Well, if you think poorly of DEI programs, even if you do, they aren't actually destroying liberal education. In the way that Rufo and fellow trustees are destroying New College, there may be some version of a competent transformation of New College, but to be done well, it would have to be done slower, doing limited harm to existing stakeholders, maintaining enough stability to manage the change without damaging the reputation of the institution. This isn't it. Within a few years, it may be that New College will emerge as the Hillsdale of the South that DeSantis promised, but again, it's a private school model. You can't just slap that onto a state support mechanism. After all, state taxpayers are now providing tens of millions of dollars to fund the experiment, which is the reason that it's wrong in the first place. Ordinarily, conservatives would be the first to tell you that. The new president boasted earlier this year, over the last 90 days, New College has received almost $50 million in new funding from the state, which is more than the university has received in the past 20 years. And it's great that there's state support for it. That's true. But yeah, again, ordinarily conservatives would say wasteful spending. No, why aren't they doing this this way, that way? Or let the student, let the free market determine whether or not they're going to have a student body and whether they're going to have adequate funding. But it is a state institution. It should be getting some support. But they'd be going crazy. They are. They did go crazy. You paid money to New College for them to do gender studies. I say we cut that out for savings to balance our budget, but also quadruple what we were giving them now that we can waste it on baseball instead. $50 million is a lot of money for, again, a college with 700 students. It is more than enough to serve current students well, while broadening the institution, as a matter of fact, right? Isn't it? Take a look at the numbers just for a second. I think I did this math when I got $50 million, 700 students. That's $71,428.57 per student. I don't know whether that's an annual appropriation or not, but think of what you could be doing with that. That's the high end of private school tuition, but this is a state institution. So yes, as he says, it's more than enough to serve current students well while broadening the institution. Even if you're bound and determined to use state taxpayer money to pay for this transformation, you could do it. But that's not what's happening. Instead, the ideologues leading New College are wreaking havoc, ignoring the rules of their institution, the norms of the profession, and the promises made to students. The sheer scale of the failures becomes all the more appalling given the scale of the resources on hand, resources previously denied to New College when it was judged not to align with the ideological preferences of the ruling party. New College students and faculty have become collateral damage, unwilling subjects in an ideological lab experiment. That used to be the sort of thing that the conservatives used to say, was invalid on its face, something that the taxpayers needed to be protected from. All right. I was thinking about, just as I was reading, a way to open up one of the other articles I wanted to share with you about this subject, which was from the Miami Herald. It occurred to me that I might be able to open it up in a different way and see what's going on. But I don't think I'm going to be able to get to it all that quickly. All right. But let's jump back to what Don was doing and conclude with his piece here. Where did we leave off? Right, the sheer scale of the failures becomes all the more appalling given the scale of the resources on hand. Resources previously denied to New College when it was judged not to align with their ideological preferences. New College students and faculty have become collateral damage, right? Unwilling subjects of an ideological lab experiment. The greatest education may be to watch firsthand how ideological blinders destroy the competent management of American institutions. Not just education, but remember again, Steve Bannon's stated goal, he keeps telling us right to our faces that his goal is to smash the administrative state. In other words, make it his view of the best path from where we are to whatever the hell he thinks he sees in the future, remade in his image, is make it impossible for the government to function so that he can rebuild government functions up from the ground up or become a warlord. I'm not sure which. People who lack experience do not care about core organizational goals. Oh, I guess not. That's not a cause and effect, but rather a list of the attributes of the people who are doing this. People who lack experience, do not care about core organizational goals, will not listen to stakeholders, and are hell-bent on pursuing their narrow ideological agenda, will ultimately destroy the organizations they are charged with leading. And they're quite open about wanting to do that. And that's a big component of Project 2025 as well, by the way. This is a lesson that I expect more and more of us will be forced to learn in coming years, especially if they get a chance to implement Project 2025 on the rest of us. This is an early warning about that. The New College students will just learn it first. They are learning that while populism promises to serve the people, that's just a line that they feed you, its true purpose is to serve an ideological elite, believe it or not, indifferent to the core clients of public services. If you read, I'm not sure whether we're talking about past tense or not, if you read a glowing review of the New College in the National Review or the Federalist or the Atlantic in a couple of years. Okay, it's a future. If you read it, if you later read a glowing review, spare a thought for the students whose college experience, that very valuable thing that everyone thinks of nostalgic, that college experience destroyed to make this possible. Spare a thought for the resources wasted along the way. In the meantime, people like Rufo and DeSantis are rewarded by a political economy that mistakes advocacy for achievement and policy action for doing things well. The whole DeSantis boom was built on the mirage that he was Trump, but competent. That didn't hold up, did it? But there's a vast difference between strong-arming policies through a friendly legislature and managing the competing views and needs of a lot of stakeholders. DeSantis has shown precious little capacity to engage with those who see the world differently. Rufo is the golden boy of the American far right for his ability to turn education into a culture war battlefield. But in the one case where he's actually been given responsibility for serving the students he claims to care about, he's failing them. When they lose interest and move on to another project, who will clean up the mess that they've made? It's a good question. Great way to end this one. But just wanted to, bring your attention to just what a disaster it's been there in Florida. And so there's more. Miami Herald has a story that I may or may not be able to get to and read. But Florida universities, it says, have been ordered to review all courses for anti-Semitic and anti-Israel content, material, as they put it. So now, intervening in the core curriculum of what's being taught at the rest of the Florida state-supported educational system. And, while we all want to root out anti-Semitism, we don't want that to be in there. This is, of course, the next stage of the purging of college campuses of anybody that they don't like, that they can hold responsible for allowing protest on the campuses, and a way to punish people for that. And so if you are teaching anything about what's going on in the Middle East, and you say anything that may or may not comport with what DeSantis and Rufo think you should be telling people about the Israel-Palestinian conflict, well, then that's anti-Semitism, and you need to be kicked off campus. So that is happening out there, although unfortunately it's behind a paywall. Well, I should say fortunately, so that the authors of the work down there at the Miami Herald get fairly compensated for their efforts. But that's not one of the places that I have to this point been able to properly pay for their work, but they're on the case. And there are a couple other items from down there in Florida that probably would make good accompaniment for it. I guess unfortunately they were parked at different times in over the past couple of weeks, and so they're not all grouped together. But there's also a report here from Politico that fits into this major framework. This from when? Late July 26th. Andrew Atterbury covering this story for Politico. Federal courts spike a piece of DeSantis's Stop Woke law. Again, this is, I think, fits in as a piece of Don Moynihan's argument. They're just, running around smashing things, saying we're going to pass a Stop Woke law. And that's a stupid thing to do, from the beginning. What is woke? You don't even know. How are you going to stop it if you don't know what it is? Doesn't matter. What it is a law for me to say it's now illegal for you to do stuff on college campuses that are funded by the state taxpayers if I don't like it. Well, won't lawyers have a problem with that? That's sort of one-sided thing where you just say, well, on the basis that it makes me mad, you can't do it. It's not really how it works. And the state courts actually, or in this case, federal courts, actually reminding him of that. A separate challenge surrounding how the anti-woke policies apply to colleges and universities is still under appeal. So federal courts spike a piece of the Stop Woke law, but the part that he's trying to apply to colleges and universities, well, there's still a question here. A federal judge permanently shut down a significant piece of Florida's so-called Stop Woke Act on Friday, again, back at the end of July, delivering a devastating blow to a signature law pushed by Governor Ron DeSantis to restrict workplace trainings about race. It might work for workplaces, maybe not for academic institutions. We still have to see what the courts have to say about that. But once again, it was basically, well, I don't like it, so can't I use the legislature to force everybody to do things the way I want? Federal courts say, guess what? Not really. Passed by the GOP-dominated legislature in 2022, it expanded state anti-discrimination laws to target lessons over subjects like white privilege, by creating new protections for workers. That's the way they're framing it. You don't have to listen to this garbage, you know. But Florida has never been able to enforce the anti-woke law for businesses since it was quickly sued and ultimately determined by 2 courts to violate free speech rights protected by the Constitution. Perhaps you've heard of the Constitution? Today's decision serves as a powerful reminder that the First Amendment cannot be warped to serve the interests of elected officials. Shalini Goel Agarwal, special counsel for Protect Democracy, which represented businesses that sued Florida, said in a statement, Florida's anti-woke policies, quote-unquote anti-woke policies, targeted schools and companies, saying that lessons or trainings that would make a person, quote, feel guilt, anguish, or any other form of psychological distress, unquote, due to their race, color, sex, or national origin, were illegal under the law, codified at Florida Law HB 7, I guess. Well, it says here, FL HB 7, parentheses, 22R, with no explanation of why that terminology. But anyway, you see how they end up warping First Amendment things. Like, it's against your First Amendment rights for you to have to listen to your employer saying that you shouldn't be a white supremacist, for instance. You can't tell me I can't be a white supremacist. That's not fair. Well, your employer actually can. It's a private business. They can do whatever they want. Can we force state colleges to follow the same rule? Well, maybe not. It's not a private institution. In response, a group of businesses, Honeymoon Registry Technology Company. Oh, my God. Okay, I mean, you make a wedding registry online. Did that really need to be done? Well, anyway, they did. Honeymoon Registry Technology Company, honeyfund.com. That doesn't sound very good, actually. And a Florida-based Ben & Jerry's franchisee, Primo Tampa, along with workplace diversity consultancy Collective Concepts and its co-founder, Chavara Oren, challenged the law, claiming it forced them to censor themselves on important societal matters and from engaging employees in robust discussion of ideas essential for improving their workplaces. Yeah, if the private companies want to do this stuff, is that really something that you can get in the way of? Well, attorneys for the DeSantis administration, representing Attorney General Ashley Moody and the Florida Commission on Human Relations, however, have contended that the anti-woke law restricts no speech and only regulates that employers can't enforce employees to listen to, quote, certain speech against their will at the risk of losing their jobs. But, of course, if the speech were, you have to, for instance, this happens all the time. Ron DeSantis is running for president. Everybody has to be there for his press conference to provide a crowd or you're fired. That they allow. Now, the law was initially blocked temporarily in August of 2022 by Chief U.S. District Judge Mark Walker, who criticized its policies as bordering on unintelligible. Well, that's okay under Trump, though, right? That ruling was upheld by the 11th U.S. Circuit Court of Appeals in March as a 3-judge panel slammed the anti-woke law for penalizing certain viewpoints. That is, of course, the greatest First Amendment sin. The DeSantis administration, basically, the whole thing was upside down backwards, right? You can't discriminate against people's desire to discriminate. That's the Republican view of the First Amendment. The DeSantis administration hinted at a possible appeal to the Supreme Court. It's a dangerous place to go. And disagreed with the rulings for determining that, quote, companies have a right to indoctrinate their employees with racist and discriminatory ideologies. But, of course, that's just their view of the attempt to dissuade people from holding racist and discriminatory ideologies. But you have a right to be racist and discriminatory, and it's racist and discriminatory for you to say that we can't have people who are racist and discriminatory. No, it doesn't work that way. Attorneys for the state, though, did not oppose a motion by the group of businesses seeking a permanent injunction against the Stop Woke Act, which Walker granted on Friday, back at the end of July. DeSantis officials did not immediately respond to a request for comment about the order. A separate challenge surrounding how the policies apply to colleges and universities is currently awaiting a ruling in appeals court. You might be able to force people into that ideological training in a place which is, ironically, sponsored by government dollars or taxpayer dollars, depending on how you view these things. Okay, I thought that was rather interesting. And there's an awful lot happening down there in Florida in the the Department of Education, and what they are doing that you ought to know about. Have I done this one? I don't know. I think I recorded this one for use during the break, but I don't know whether we actually made it onto the air with it. But it was an article from The Guardian, and we'll just throw in one more Florida thing here as we ready to make our exit for the day, that one of the books recently banned in Florida. I mean, I definitely did read this for recording, so now I'm confused about whether I made it on the air or not. A book about book banning has, you'll never guess, been banned by the Indian River County educational authorities here. A book about book bans banned by Florida School Board. Of course, he dared them to do it. Alan Gratz, the author, named his book Ban This Book. And so they did. But of course, they were banned after opposition to the book from parents linked to Moms 3 Liberty. I know they call themselves Moms 4 Liberty, but 3 is the number of sexual partners that Moms for Liberty like to have at any given time, as it turns out. A book about book bans has been banned in a Florida school district. Ban This Book, a children's book written by Alan Gratz, will no longer be available in the Indian River County School District since the school board voted to remove the book last month. Gratz's book, which came out in 2017, follows fourth grader Amy Ann Ollinger as she tries to check out her favorite book. Ollinger is told by the librarian that she cannot because it was banned after a classmate's parent thought it was inappropriate. She then creates a secret banned books library, entering into an unexpected battle over book banning, censorship, and who has the right to decide what she and her fellow students can read, according to the book's description on Gratz's website. In a peculiar case of life imitating art, Jennifer Pippin, a parent in the coastal community, challenged the book, and they voted 3-2 in favor of removing it from shelves on the basis that it teaches rebellion of school board authority, according to the Tallahassee Democrats report on the subject. By the way, they even got the syntax of their sentence wrong. Rebellion against school board authority? That's a sentence. Rebellion of it?
From
you need a book.
networksradio.com.
A grammar book.
You have been listening to Kagro in the Morning with David Waldman.
And good for you, because now you're going to stay tuned for Justice Putnam, who will bring you the West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy right here on Netroots Radio next. Following the program, guess where he's going to dive in? Apartheid Clyde. He got some bad news over his Trump-linked scam pack. I'm just going to stay tuned just to figure out who Apartheid Clyde is. You don't want that as your nickname. See you next week.